Hey, Frog fans, welcome back to another episode of Frogs Insider presented by the Flying T Club. Jamie Plunkett here with a very special guest today. TCU head baseball coach Kirk Saarloos joins the show. Kirk, you've had a busy week, man, with meeting Shaquille O'Neal and having a hole-in-one and learning a lot about your baseball team in the Purple and White World Series. How are you doing today?
Doing great, and we have our 2025 commits on campus this weekend for the football weekend, and so yeah, it's been a very busy week, but it's been a fun week. Shaq is a large human being.
Yes, he is massive. He fits that chair in a different way than most people do when he was sitting courtside the other night. I saw Lane got a picture with him too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. Lane went over, and he was actually really cool the whole night. Like, I mean, there probably was, I don't know, 500 kids in the arena, and I think all 500 kids wanted to come down and were yelling at him, and he took the time to take a lot of pictures with them. Very gracious, and because I'm sure that happens everywhere he goes, and it
Oh
probably
yeah,
gets annoying. But he was awesome.
well, that's really good. And TCU got the win, which was nice to see as well. Basketball looks pretty good so far this year. Before we get into some baseball stuff, though, you had a hole in one legitimately at the baseball golf tournament that you guys did out at JJ Colleen's new course. Is that where y'all were?
Yeah, out at Sugar Tree.
Mm-hmm.
JJ was a great host, and well, I don't know what you consider legitimately because I was kind of just roving around,
Mm-hmm.
in the golf cart and would hop out and hit a drive on this hole with this group. Um, on that par three, I hit, I think, a 9 iron with a group about an hour before, hit a pretty good one, and then circled back and then hit another one. So actually, I had two or three shots on that hole. One went to 1 foot, one went in, and one went to about 20 feet. So the seventh hole at Sugar Tree is one of my friends.
You're dialed in. It sounds like
So I don't claim it.
you
It
don't
went in the
claim it.
hole. I don't claim it because I didn't play 9 holes. I didn't play 18 holes. I was just kind of bouncing around, hitting shots with different groups, and
Okay.
one of them just happened to go in. So I'm not claiming it officially as my second hole in one.
Okay. Well, where was the first hole in one?
The first one was my first year of retirement from playing baseball in 2010. I was up in Washington. That's where my wife and I lived at the time. And of course, I'm a member out up there. It was literally the last round before leaving to go down to California to start my coaching career. So the last round up there in 2010 and sometime in July.
Right on, man. What
So it's
was?
14 years in between hole in ones. I think the number for the odds for a hole in one are like one in like 20,000. I think something like
Mm-hmm.
that. So it was still really cool to see it go in.
Yeah,
Coach
absolutely.
Laura had one this last year as well. So
Oh,
a legitimate one because he played 18 holes. He was over at Ridgely and made one this summer. So
so all right. So we'll circle back around to what 2038 for your guys' next ones. Is that
exactly.
okay?
She's
Sweet.
I'll be old. I don't even know if I'll be playing. I'll be old and won't be able to hit balls.
Might not be a 9 iron at that point. Maybe something a
Yeah.
little longer. But all right, man. So I know that it was a long off season, not making the postseason last year, but you went out in the portal this offseason and seemed to make a real concerted effort to bring in some supplemental older pieces. Tommy Lepore, Cole Kramer, Preston Gamester, a lot of guys that have had success other places, along with a really impressive freshman class that mostly made it to campus and avoided kind of the draft risk there. When you sat down and kind of looked at your roster day one of fall camp this year, what stood out to you and what gave you confidence in this season?
Well, I think the big thing is getting that freshman class to campus because that sets you up. Hopefully, if you evaluate it right and those guys are talented like we think they are, it gives you a 3 year window of feeling good about being able to fill around them over the next 3 years. It's really hard to go to the portal every year and just try and hit on portal guys just because baseball's a really hard sport and it's the roster turnover. It's hard when you just go to the portal every year. And so for us to get a really great freshman team, our freshman group on campus, and then a lot of our transfer guys were, just completed their freshman year. So they're going to be here for 2 years as well. So we feel great about that. and then the older guys kind of having a sour taste in their mouth from, May 27th of, this past year of not making it to a regional. And they've been really, really good in terms of from day one, leading this group well, making this group feel welcome. I think the freshman group is a talented group, but they're also respectful of what the older guys have done here at TCU, what they're trying to do. And so I think you have a really good group of guys, one that really likes to hang out together because everybody feels like they're all trying to do the same thing, and that's to get TCU back to the College World Series. And so there's no cliques. It's a pretty much, you got a whole roster that really enjoys working and being around each other.
It seems like every time you go by the facility up there, at least one or two of them are in the cages getting some swings in or throwing a ball or something. It's been really impressive to see this fall. You're right. They seem pretty locked in.
Yeah. It's sometimes we got to kick them out of the hitting facility. Sometimes they're in there too long, too much. And, there's something to be said for getting reps. There's another thing to be said for sometimes you go in there and you swing yourself into a slump, and so, don't mistake activity for achievement. So the main thing is they like to work, but I think they work smart.
Well, that's good. That's good. So this is a question I like to ask every coach that I talk to because it's always a challenge from a media perspective to sit there, watch all of fall camp happen, watch the Purple and White World Series happen, and come away with, concrete concepts of like what this team actually is. Because I think we were talking about this earlier in the fall with football. Fall camp for football, I thought TCU was going to have a great running game. Turns out the rush defense is the thing that's struggling, and that's why the run game looked so good in the fall. When you're evaluating your team in scrimmage situations, how are you evaluating? What are you taking away from those experiences? And if it's a day where, say, the bats just have a great day, how do you approach the pitching that day, or vice versa?
Yeah, I've kind of said it to you, said it to a lot of people. It's really hard to win an inter squad game. Because the pitchers either dominate and then you're like, holy cow, we can't hit. Or the hitters dominate and you're like, oh crap, we can't pitch. So it's really hard sometimes to evaluate that. So what you try to do is you try to look at it individually in terms of, how guys are practicing, how they're doing specifically in situations and in different roles. And so, we feel pretty good about the pitching. We feel really, you come out of the fall, you want to be healthy, and you also want to learn, can Ben Abelt start? He did a little bit at the end of last year. So now, in the fall, we're trying to stretch him out. Now we're trying to find some of the new guys. What are their abilities when situations are a little bit more difficult? Like Mason Brassfield, a talented left-handed pitcher that was a freshman that in the Purple White World Series, there was a couple people in the stands. Noah Franco, another one of our freshmen, hits a two-run homer with 2 outs to put his team up. Mason now has to go back out there with a 3-2 lead in the bottom of the 9th. And how does he react to that? All of a sudden, he's feeling like he needs to produce for his purple team to win the game, and he walks the first guy. So you're like, at no point was I ever going to take him out because we had to figure out what was he going to do in this situation. And so you're trying to look at those small little situations where what do guys' body language look like? How do they react to it? Do they use their routine? Do they slow the game down, or does the game take control of them? And so sometimes you don't find that out until you start playing somebody in the spring. And a lot of times that's why in the spring you're going to see a whole different team than at the beginning in non-conference than you do maybe in conference play, because you're trying to figure out who the right 9 guys are. Then you're trying to figure out your rotation. Then you're trying to figure out your bullpen. And so there's been fall Americans here before, which is, the All-American in the fall or the All-American in the summer. And then all of a sudden, once the spring comes, it's a different guy. So I put stock in the fall for sure. But Trey Richardson had one of the worst falls ever 2 or 3 years ago. But he had track record. And next thing you know, the spring comes around, it's a little bit different, so it's hard. It's really hard because you make decisions based on what you see in the fall and in January to start the season in February. And that's why by the time it gets to May and June, a lot of times it looks a lot different than it did in January and February.
Yeah, I think that's true in all sports, right? There are some guys that are just practice guys, and there's some guys that
Yeah,
are just gamers, where they go out there, they could have had the worst week of practice ever, and you know what you're going to get from them when they get out on that field and it matters. Um, you know, Max Duggan, I think, is a perfect example of that for football. You mentioned Trey Richardson for baseball a couple seasons ago as well. You also talked about Ben Abelt and
hmm
stretching him out and the possibility of him being a starter this year. Uh, how important is it for this pitching staff to have a guy like Ben Abelt anchor it either in the rotation or at the end of the bullpen when you're talking about the number of guys that are new coming in or the guys that are coming off injuries, Cohen Feeser being one of those guys. Just how important is it to have kind of that anchor in Ben Abelt on the roster?
absolutely. Because you're going to have a lot of guys that are young, looking at, okay, who's the guy, and you know, a couple guys come to mind though. You have Cole Klecker, who did it his freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
You have Cademan Parker, who's done it in flashes over his 3-year career, that got drafted, that came back, and is doing an amazing job of leading this team as well. But Ben Abel, in terms of back-to-back All-American years, he's kind of the silent assassin. Like, he doesn't say a whole lot. He's pretty intense, and but it's nice to feel like you have a guy that he's another guy that you don't really worry about when the spring rolls around. You're just worrying about, okay, with the new role, is it going to change anything? Because we tried to do this with Riley Farrell, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. He was the closer. We tried to make him a starter in the fall, and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And with Ben, he's started games. He started 2 games. One game was freshman year, I think. He started a couple games last year. So now it's just the mentality of, okay, it's basically 6 1-inning relief appearances in one day. That's your mindset. It doesn't, don't hold anything back. Just go for 6 1-inning appearances on your start day. But to have that in terms of anchoring, like you said, a guy that has done it. When the grease is when the fire, he's going to be ready to do it. And so, would love for him to be our Friday night guy, but there's a lot of roles that are up for grabs. And that's the exciting part for me, is that there's enough talent that that it's not a for sure thing.
That's one of the big differences, it feels like, from last season or last fall is, going into last year, you kind of had a couple ideas of who was penciled in where, maybe as starters. A couple guys came in as freshmen and earned some roles. But this year, walking out there the first day, and first of all, not knowing half the faces like I did,
Yeah.
it does feel like there is competition at almost every single spot on the field. Does that give you what does that draw out of you as far as, hey, we've got a ton of depth and talent on this team, who the heck's going to start? Or, gosh, we don't, we could start 2 whole different rosters here and feel pretty good about it at any given time?
Yeah, I think at the very beginning of the fall, I felt like that was the case. We felt like we had almost 2 guys at each position,
Mm-hmm.
where when we played our inter squad game, we felt great because it wasn't, you could just mix and match, and you had a lot of great options. And as the fall went on, it kind of separated itself a little bit in terms of, okay, these are probably the 9, 10, 11 guys that are going to do most of the, carrying most of the weight in terms of the defense and offensive portion of it. And so, which is good, because that's what you want. Now, does that mean anything when we get to January, when they come back from break? A little bit. But at the same time, the guys that play the best are going to play the most. And there are some guys, one guy that sticks out for sure is Preston Gamster, who came from Paris Junior College and played shortstop for them for 2 years. And now, he can very easily play shortstop for us. Tony's having a great fall and doing a great job at shortstop. Gamster slide over to third base. Can he play second base? Cole Kramer can play third, second, first. There's a lot of versatility in terms of being able to get different people in the lineup, because we're going to have to. Trevor Baumler, one of our freshman pitchers, has also had a really good fall offensively. So how do we get him in the lineup? When you feel like you got an outfield of Sam Myers, Chase Brunson when he's healthy, and Sawyer Stroh-Snyder. And then you got Noah Franco, who was the MVP from an offensive standpoint in the Fall World Series, who really came on the last 2 weeks. who can play first base. He can play left. Obviously, he can DH. And then you got Isaac Cadena, a guy that was consistent pretty much throughout the whole fall that can play the outfield, first base, and catcher. But then you go to the catching position, and you got obviously Carson Bone coming off injury. But Nolan Traeger had one of the better falls, who was a freshman catcher. So you kind of have if you watch the Dodgers at all this year, there's a lot of moving pieces. Mookie Betts could play right field. He could play short. He could play second. Muncie's playing third. He's playing first. It's almost just, interchangeable. And so to get the right bats in the lineup. So we feel like as of today, we have some versatility from an athletic standpoint for guys to go play different positions. And now it's just a matter of, figuring out 9, 10, 11 guys to get the at-bats and how we're going to play them.
I know you don't ever want injuries, obviously, but with Chase and Carson missing good portions of the fall, how important was it for guys like Nolan Traeger and Trevor Baumler to get more reps for you to be able to see what they're capable of doing?
Yeah, for sure. I think, with Nolan was probably going to catch regardless. Probably just, Bowen on one side, Nolan on the other. But Jacob Silva, who, Anthony's little brother that's here, is a little bit further, behind defensively, but I thought had a really good fall in the box, but it allowed him to probably get more reps behind the plate and figure it out. And then Sam Myers gets to play a little bit of center field because Chase is hurt, and you get, Sawyer and a couple of the other guys in the outfield running around and kind of playing not out of position, because our goal is to have 3 center fielders. Mm-hmm. And so, you look at those 3 guys, on paper, Sam Myers can play center. Chase Brunson obviously played center. Sawyer can play center. That's your goal, is to be able to have guys in the outfield that can run around all as center fielders. And so, Baumler, we tried to protect him a little bit in terms of his throwing. So he played a little bit of outfield, not quite as much as the other guys, but kind of a blessing in disguise in terms of getting other guys reps for sure.
Going back to pitching just for a second, I know that you mentioned, we talked about Abelt, you mentioned Cademan and Cole. But as far as guys that you wanted to stretch out this fall and guys you have plans to stretch out when they come back in January, who's kind of on that list? Who's up for an opportunity to compete for one of those starting spots? Yeah,
I think, you kind of want to stretch everybody out when they come back. And then as it gets a little closer, you kind of taper that off into, the guys, probably the 4 or 5 guys that you feel are going to start. The first weekend of the year we play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, so we're going to need 4 starters right out of the gate. But, guys, Abel, Baumler, Brassfield, Caleb, I always say Caleb Sloan because we used to have a Caleb Sloan back in the day, but Braden Sloan had a really good fall. We're going to stretch him out. Cole Klecker, obviously, Parker, Rodriguez, probably missing a couple guys as I look down at this. Trey Newman is a guy that's probably going to be pitching more out of the bullpen. But Tommy Lepore, Zach James. So we feel like, we're going to stretch out probably 8 or 9 guys and be able to figure out, our 4 starters from that. But feel good, that we have some guys that do different things, different arm slots from different sides with different kind of repertoires in terms of what they offer. And it's going to be fun in terms of putting this, piece of the puzzle together in terms of the mound.
What are those conversations like with guys as you get a week and a half into January camp and you kind of start to see some separation? Just how do you handle conversations with players when you see the roles developing, but maybe guys are still out there competing for something different?
Sure. If you're sitting in a room with all the pitchers and you ask who wants to be a starting pitcher, every hand goes up.
Right. Yeah.
So, and there's only 4 opportunities a week. So what do you do with that? You figure out, okay, well, you tell what's happened in previous years. History usually has a tendency to repeat itself. And so, there's many times when your starting rotation that doesn't end up being your rotation at the end of the year. And so it's pretty easy. If you pitch really good, we're going to pitch you more. So if you want to be a starting pitcher, that's usually the guys that pitch the most, pitch really well. It's pretty plain and simple. Some guys, we feel like are more kind of niched into the bullpen role because maybe their arm is resilient. They can pitch twice on a weekend. Maybe they have a higher effort delivery and their stuff tails off after pitch 40. So there are things that go into it where it's like you're not ready to be a starting pitcher yet. But for the guys that kind of are starting pitchers that we then send to the bullpen, we had a guy by the name of Tyler Alexander, was a second round pick out of here. He's in the big leagues for, I think, probably the 7th or 8th year. He was here 2 years. He always started the year as a weekend guy. The middle part of the year, we'd have to send him to the bullpen. And then he'd come back out of the bullpen and finish the season pitching like a bullpen arm, like we were talking about, 6 1-inning outings. And sometimes the bullpen does that to guys. They don't want to be down there in the bullpen. They're like, man, I got to figure this out and I got to pitch better. And next thing you know, they're in the rotation. Jared Janzik, another guy who started the year as the long reliever, pitched really well. Next thing you know, we brought him in more high leverage situation, pitched really well. Then he became the Sunday starter, pitched pretty good. And by the end of the year, he started game 1 of a regional, super regional, and a World Series. So just because you start somewhere doesn't mean you're going to finish there. But the big thing is understanding your role, maybe not accepting it in terms of not being satisfied with it, but understanding that the way to get to what role you want to have is when you get your opportunities, do well with them.
Another recent example is Cole Klecker. I think it was the second weekend of his freshman year. He was already just the performance on the field was speaking for itself. I think it was the first month of the season he was already in the starting rotation just because of how he pitched out of the bullpen. So
yeah, against Arkansas, Florida State, I forget his 3rd outing, and then his 4th outing, we're like, guy, we're stupid. Why aren't we starting this guy? And then we started him.
And it worked out pretty well. Pretty well for old Cole.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the schedule because you do, like you said, you start out in San Diego for 4 games, then you go to Arlington for the Globe Life Series. You play Michigan, Arkansas, and Kansas State. But TCU doesn't have a home game until February 25th on that Tuesday, and then the first weekend series that following weekend on the 28th. Is that just a kind of happenstance of the schedule there as far as, kind of a later home game than normal, it feels like?
Yeah, I mean, we had a home and home with San Diego. They came out a couple years ago. So we had to return the visit. And so we decided a couple years ago we were going to do it to open the year. San Diego, not a bad spot. Probably going to get pretty decent weather. So wanted to open up and return that trip there. And then Globe Life, we're pretty much in that tournament almost every year. And it fluctuates and it differs between week 2, week 1. So this year it's week 2. Next year it's week 1. So, the first, 6, 7 games, are going to be quote unquote on the road, but, really only 4 true road games. And then, and then after that, I mean, really your schedules are kind of put together. Like I'm looking at 2028 schedules right now, and figuring out where we need to go and who we need to play. So this year just happened that, we don't start our first home game until, what'd you say, game 7?
Something like
8?
that, yeah. 7.
Yeah, game 8, I think, because we got 4 at San Diego, no midweek game, and then we got 3 at Globe Life, and then I think maybe our first home game is a midweek game, maybe?
Yeah, the Tarleton State game.
Yep. So Tarleton, and then I think we got, Southern Miss. So, yeah, opening game on a weekend against Southern Miss is going to be – that's a really, really good team. It's in the same – cut from the same cloth as DBU. They've every year seem to be in a regional, super regional type atmosphere, usually playing at home. So we'll have our work cut out with them for sure.
When you look at the conference part of the schedule this year, no Kansas State outside of the one game in Arlington, no Oklahoma State. Does that change non-conference scheduling? I guess you wouldn't know.
Mm-mm. We don't know.
Yeah. So
yeah, we found out about 9 months ago what our schedule for conference is.
What does it? I mean, it feels weird to not play Oklahoma State. Don't
Yeah.
you agree? I mean,
Yeah, it feels really
that's
weird.
one of the most fun rivalries in the conference, I think.
Yeah, it feels really weird. It's you look at our schedule and it's like, there's a lot of teams that we haven't really played in a really long time. On that schedule, and it's conference play, and so I think in this day and age in college athletics, get used to seeing things you don't usually see, and I think that's what we're seeing now with when it used to be just our conference opponents before this expansion. You're going to play everybody. Home, road. You knew where you're going to play everybody. Just flip flopped every year, and now, it's interesting in terms of the teams that you skip. I think you can you only skip a team, one time. You're going to play. We'll play K-State next year. We'll play Oklahoma State next year. But it is weird. It's different. But it is what it is.
Kind of pulling back a little bit as we kind of wrap up the conversation here. You think about the changing landscape of college athletics, and you look at baseball specifically, the challenges that it faces from a scholarship standpoint, from a recruiting against the draft standpoint, especially for those kind of upper echelon teams, which the TCU is. What does it take for a school in TCU's position, private university, Big 12 conference, to keep up with, say, an ACC baseball team or an SEC baseball team? It feels like there's some separation happening there. You look at the College World Series last year, 4 SEC teams, 4 ACC teams. With all of the unknown that's hopefully going to be settled out by April, how is TCU positioned from a baseball standpoint to ensure that blue blood status, that level of competition that fans are used to, is maintained moving forward?
Yeah, there is a big separation feeling like it's happening. I mean, we're seeing it in the recruiting world,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of it has to do with NIL. The other thing is you look around and TCU costs $80,000, and we're at 11.7 scholarships. There's trying to figure out, we're able to start adding scholarships. What is that going to look like? Not sure yet. And so most of our NIL money, all of our NIL money, is really going to knock down the cost of our players having to come to school. 11.7, you got 40 people on the roster. That leaves about, let's just call it easy math, that's 29, 29 players that are having to pay. If you give 11 full rides, you got 29 more that are having to pay $80,000. Now they might get academic money or financial aid or some NIL. But I think that's the hard part from a private school standpoint, is just the cost, the cost of making it affordable for families. And then the story, we got to tell our story better in the Big 12. The ACC and the SEC's telling a pretty good story, and they're on TV all the time. And, kids are now growing up thinking that the only way that they're going to reach their goals and dreams is to go to a SEC program or an ACC school. And we got to do a better job of obviously winning on the national settings. But we also have to do a better job of telling our story as a conference. I think that's what those two conferences are doing well. And but ultimately it comes down to developing players and winning. And if you're not doing that, you're going to get left behind. And so that's what we're dead set on, is making sure we're getting the right players in here, making sure we're developing them, and making sure we have an opportunity to win.
And TCU's done it with one arm tied behind their back for however long it's been happening, right? So the uphill battle isn't new news necessarily.
Nope. It's very tiring though, in terms of, you want to feel like you're playing on a level playing field, and we have an unbelievable administration here and fan support and people that support our program. And I know it's tiring for them too, because it seems like it's coming from everywhere in terms of, the facilities race, NIL, just everything. It just seems like it's never ending. And now with revenue sharing, what is that going to look like? With the rosters, what is that going to look like? So there's so many things up in the air. It'd be nice to know the rules for once, and to be able to figure out a plan. Okay, well, this is what it's going to look like for the next, let's just even say 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it's going to look like. Okay, how do we take advantage of it and position ourselves in a way where we're the destination where people want to come to? And so that's a daily talk that we have all the time over here. And the great thing is with coming back to recruiting, the 24 class gives us an opportunity for a 3-year window just from that class alone, because it was a big class, covers a lot of different positions, to be able to position ourselves and understand that in this next 3 years, we're going to be able to put ourselves in a great position, not only in our conference, but from a national perspective as well.
Absolutely. All right, Kirk, I appreciate the time, man. Thank you so much for hopping on the show. Best of luck as you kind of have a little bit of a breather here, I guess, for between now and January. Although
Usually,
coaching never sleeps, I guess.
December's a great month. Between Thanksgiving and New Year's, we're not allowed to really be with the players at all. They got to, they have school and study days and finals, and then they go home for a little bit. So, we get a lot of. Hopefully, it's nice and sunny and warm in December, so we get a little bit of golf in. But
there you go.
I appreciate all your coverage of TCU athletics and what you do for all of our sports. It's really amazing and awesome. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you, Kirk. Have a great day, man, and hopefully December's another hole-in-one kind of month for you. All right,
let's go.
All right,
go Frogs.
Go Frogs.